So this is our closing panel. And for that, we have 45 minutes. And after that, we'll have 15 minutes where we'll be having a closing speech from Paul Maddenson, the Director of Operations at the UK National Cybersecurity Centre. So the objective of this session is to do some reflections about the sort of the conversations that we've been having throughout the day. And to hear from you, the chairs of the two workshops, what are the key takeaways that you left the workshops with, and to get some feedback and some reaction from both Jemima and Robert. But let me introduce everyone, really, because we haven't done that in a plenary. So Robert Collett, Associate Fellow International Security at Chatham House. James Shire, Senior Research Fellow, also International Security Program at Chatham House. Robert Phillips, Digital Inclusion Advisor from the Development and Parliament Directorate at the FCDO. And then Jemima Hodkinson, the head of the CSSF Cyber Program from the Cyber Policy Department at the FCDO. So welcome to all of you. So the format, as I said, we will start with the takeaways from both Robert and James, and then we'll go over to Robert and the other Robert and Jemima for your reactions. I've sort of participated in half of the workshops, and it was really interesting to sort of like see the kind of richness of conversations and lessons, etc. And I was struck by a few things that people said about how, sometimes the struggles are common across different countries, how there was some learning going on in the room, and the interest to kind of learn more about how they've done this and done that. But I think importantly, and I think that's something that you brought up, Robert, if we were to do it again, we would do 1 to 3. And I think that was really interesting to hear it from the people who were implementing the different projects. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Rob. And you're going to, I think both of you are going to talk to us about the takeaways, structuring them in under three headings. What are the keys to success from the conversations that emerge, the challenges that we still need to overcome, and how do we work towards strategic and sustainable impact? What are some of the kind of good tips to do that? So I'll start with you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. First of all, a big thank you to Working Group 1. I'm not allowed to say you were the best working group, but see me afterwards in the pub and I'll be able to confirm who was. You were all fantastic. We had a lot of really practical lessons on specific topics, and our topics were communications campaigns, SME toolkit, cybersecurity curriculum in schools, data protection regulation and their commissions, and training and exercising from cybercrime and cybersecurity perspectives. Those specific lessons will be captured in the report. So what I'll try to draw out now is lessons which kind of apply to a number of different projects in different sectors. And I've got 7 key lessons, takeaways in the first section. So the first one is invest time and energy in understanding your target audience or your user before you start your project. We heard from one project which paused and used a research phase to interview their target audience before starting their communications campaign to them. And that yielded the sort of insights that I'll come into in my next point about the importance of language. Also, listening to users can identify some of the challenges, which I'll come on to later. For example, users told one project that it cost them quite a lot on their mobile data to access the websites that we were putting up. And there were solutions to those challenges, such as moving them to websites with free or lower data costs. The second one is that words matter. So that insight from the communication campaign that talked to its target audience was to realize they wanted to use different language when talking to the young people, the 12 to 18-year-olds they were targeting, than to the parents of those children, who are equally important to engage with, but needed a completely different set of terminology to talk to. And there was also a word of warning as well about language, which is that unintentionally we can use language which puts people off coming into careers in cybersecurity. We can talk about it in a very technical way, making it sound like an exclusively technical topic. And people go, well, I don't have any technical skills, so this is something I'm not going to engage with, and this isn't a career for me. But actually, most of us in this room probably don't have technical training in cybersecurity, yet this is the field that we're working in. So don't put off young people. And also be cautious in words, using words like hacker as well, because actually there are good hackers. It's a question of what you used your hacking for, using it for good or for crime. So be careful in some of the terminology we use. Projects can benefit from taking a multi-level approach in complex countries. For example, in Brazil, we heard about guidance documents and resources for schools and communication campaigns that are produced at the national level, but there are also guidance documents and tools at the regional level. Some of the projects were supporting those, and schools have a regional system in Brazil. And yet again, there's the local level where individual schools are doing their own activities and generating their own products. So projects need to think about national, regional, local when they're working. Before starting a big cybersecurity initiative, study how others have solved the problem that you're about to tackle. And we heard about some projects which have spent up to 7 months thinking about that. Brazil, again, in their national cybersecurity strategy, looked at examples from around the world. When they then went and did a national communications campaign, when they then thought about how to put cybersecurity in their school curriculum, they then looked at what other countries around the world had done, and they looked for what tools and resources already existed before trying to fill any gaps. Learn and adapt your project as it goes. One way to do that is to use pilots. We heard about a pilot project in Nigeria for SME toolkits where they thought, we'll try the toolkit with the most vulnerable groups and then try it with others. And they identified female-led businesses as one of those key vulnerable groups to run the pilot with. And that's also a way of thinking about how men and women experience cybersecurity differently and experience threats differently, and thinking about that can improve your projects. We also heard, I'll come on to the next one. So the power of partnerships, something you think about a lot. Public-private partnerships, pretty obvious, it had to be in there. But I was impressed by the creativity of some of the ideas. One of them was working with cinemas on communications campaigns. That came from South Africa's Small Enterprise Development Agency. And while the private sector is important as a partner, also think about the potential for universities. In Kenya, the Officer of the Data Protection Commissioner gets a lot of value from having partnerships with universities, some of them with the DAP program, like Strathmore University, but beyond that, they found other universities give them different things. Private sector partnerships also arose, as we'll come on to later, as a key to sustainability. It's one way that projects can continue into the future is develop private sector partners who will continue using the tools and campaigns that they've produced and take them forward. Finally, use the trainer-trainer approach. Something I've heard about a lot as a program manager, but it was great to hear it coming to life and a number of different projects referring to that same approach. And it was the only way in South Africa they were able to get their training out to 10,000 police officers. And we captured some good lessons on running a trainer approach and the key to make it work, which we'll put in the report. Then I'll come to challenges.
Robert,
do you
can
want me to pause?
Yeah, I wonder whether we can ask James to present on the keys to success, so can compare and contrast.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure. Can I just use the screen then? No, they're very similar, and a lot of the same keys to success came through in group 2 as well. Plenty of sharing of experiences, sharing of insights from the different projects. At the top, really, of the keys to success in the table I drew up at the end was developing trust, and especially mutual trust, between all the different stakeholders in a project. We discussed a lot about good ways to inculcate trust, to help different people, especially within organizations, but also between organizations, trust each other not only for information sharing, but also for project delivery, for reliance on regulation, for auditing, even in simulation exercises, right? All these different kinds of cybersecurity training, awareness, and capacity building require trust. So that was our headline point for the keys to success. Second headline would be communication, very closely related, that good communication builds trust, focusing on early communication, continuous sort of regular communication to different stakeholders when things are going to happen, especially, for example, in the Kenyan National Public Key Infrastructure, PKI project. They thought that was a really important part of their rollout. We heard from our Indonesian colleagues who were working on a maturity assessment framework for the banking sector about understanding risk, and especially the context of risk decisions. Right? In the financial sector, there are different approaches to risk tolerance and risk appetite. Risk is not a dirty word, right? It's a good thing, it's a positive thing, it creates growth, but understanding their risk tolerance and appetite leads to much more effective risk management. And of course, in Nigeria as well, when we had the discussion on critical national infrastructure and threat assessment, again, the question of risk assessment, how you do risk assessment in different private and public contexts came up again. Ensuring capacity, this is sort of within government organizations and especially regulators. That was a theme we had both in the morning and the afternoon. Many were relatively frank, saying that actually the requirements for producing policy, for producing documentation were quite significant, and they maybe hadn't appreciated those at the start. And so making sure that regulators and national authorities have sufficient capacity to deliver these projects, to continue working with them and improve on them in the future is really important. We heard from our South African colleagues about raising awareness again in the banking and finance sector, but they said we have to go beyond awareness, right, and secure commitment to implementing particular practices, using new tools, right? And how would you get that commitment? Well, it goes back to communication and trust. And then finally, the keys to success were to build on international best practices. I think all our stakeholders said yes, they did look at what others had done, as we heard in the group one, but also trying to balance that with recognizing the specific needs and expectations of the domestic context.
Brilliant. And I like the mix between kind of like very concrete operation, but also some that has to do with approach towards projects and some key foundations like trust, etc. Let's talk about challenges.
Okay, shorter this time, you'll be pleased to hear. Just for, and sorry for looking at my phone, my battery is dying, so I'm just checking it's on here. So, looking ahead, I was struck by the number of times that the challenge of reaching offline and rural populations was mentioned. And that came as a bit of surprise to me as somebody who's used to, like, we've got to, budgets are limited, got to prioritize, those most vulnerable right now. But a number of people are saying, no, look ahead to those who are going to be coming online next. And I think that's going to be a challenge for cash-strapped programs, and also a challenge, we're going to need new ways of reaching those people. Secondly, we talked a lot about communications campaigns, and the point was made, it takes a long time to achieve behavior change. It can't just be one campaign. We heard from the UK that they have a 9-year planning horizon on these issues, and that covers multiple budget cycles. Thirdly, the cost to users of accessing some of our resources that we're producing and of fulfilling the compliance regulations that we're generating can be a barrier to achieving the goals that we want. And we talked about that before and how there might be solutions for reducing the cost of accessing some of our resources. Data compliance is a separate issue. And then fourthly, a really practical one I liked, which was even if your simulation exercise is not planned perfectly, still do it. It's going to be super useful to you. And I think as somebody who's a bit of a perfectionist, I find that really useful, which is just often follow the 80-20 rule. And it was such a powerful lesson about how useful it is, just getting everyone around the table to learn what the common challenges will be when problems actually hit you and that bad incident happens. And it gives such energy to what you're going to be going on to do together. It really focuses people on the challenge and gives you a hit list of things that you need to address after the exercise.
Good lesson for life.
Good lesson for life.
One can say. Okay, James.
So in terms of challenges overcome, again, a little bit shorter here. So we heard about misaligned expectations because different stakeholders went into the project, assuming they knew what other stakeholders wanted or were bringing. And that wasn't the case. And so clearing up those wrong assumptions, those assumptions made in good faith but incorrectly, was really crucial to getting the project delivered. Many participants talked about the loss or lack of key skills, not necessarily in their projects, but as a risk that they were concerned about. So whether this is people moving from the public sector to the private sector with key skills, whereas it's people moving from one country to another country with key skills, the same message came across, right? There are these skills are in short supply. Of course, the long-term answer is education, grow the sector, and so on. But the short-term answer is a more complex fix. Retaining people for a mission, making sure they understand the purpose of the project. Some mentioned an early dependence on particular technologies and platforms, saying they'd managed to get rid of that by later on, realizing that it's much better to be flexible, to use whatever is available. And then we had a very interesting discussion, especially with our South African and Nigerian colleagues, about the balance between preservation of evidence in terms of cybercrime investigation and the impetus for other bodies, whether they're sector sort of associations or banks or something else, to go in and sort of intervene to disrupt whatever is in progress, a crime or activity in progress. And that's a long-standing thing that we've heard a lot, but it came up a lot here. It's a constant challenge in the cybersecurity space.
First of all, can I say I'm quite impressed that challenges are way less than the kind of the keys to success and the kind of lessons and good practices. And obviously all of this will be included in a report that we will send to you later on. But kind of like from a quick read, every challenge we've identified, there is already like a solution in the keys to success, right? To a certain extent. But it'll be interesting to do that exercise and see what is it that we're left with. Finally, on your list, we want to talk about some good practices that can help us aim for strategic and sustainable impact. Right. So, Robert.
So again, 4 points without the laptop this time. Oh. And the first one of those was that when we were looking at what are the national goals that cybersecurity can support, the thing that came through the most was economic growth and employment. And I thought, that might be talked about in abstract terms. It often comes up. But thanks to Dr. Olatunji, I can't see where he is in the room, he gave us actual numbers behind this. He said he thought that the work that Nigeria had done on data protection regulation had generated at least 8,000 new jobs and had contributed 10 million that he could see to the economy, and he talked to the future potential of this, which was much larger. So I'd say economic growth and employment were the first things to come through. The next was, it's not just that, it's a number of other national plans and goals that cybersecurity is directly contributing to. Again, in Nigeria, they've linked the cybersecurity strategy to supporting the broadband plan, the economic growth plan, digital ID schemes, counter-terrorism plans, and that was just a few of the examples. So yes, so there's more examples like that we can have. The third area is that metrics and data is a challenge for us, but the data does exist out there, and a lot is going into government. And the challenge for us is, how do we get that data from the people within government who have it to the others in government or outside it who need it to be able to do their metrics work? And we heard examples of how you can have frameworks that can support that flow of data. And then finally, on sustainability, we had a couple of concrete ideas which came out from that. So one was around involving the private sector in your partnerships early on, and then handing over your campaigns and your activities for them to sustain, and we heard some practical examples from that. And then the third one was, actually some of this stuff can become revenue generating and can become self-funding. And one of the agencies that we heard from was hoping that through its cybersecurity work, it would become self-funding within a couple of years. And I think that was a positive sustainability hope to end on.
From Group 2, one of the main ways of achieving strategic or sustainable impact was, interestingly, through maintaining course despite or through political change. Right? Participants recognize that when governments change, when new ministers or politicians are elected, come into power, they can often have an antagonistic view of previous policies, and preserving project lifetimes beyond government or ministerial change is really crucial. And some described as being as rising above the fray. And how did they do this? Well, some suggested that tying such projects to national policy and strategy, as you mentioned, right, linking clearly to specific pillars or objectives of national cyber policies and other policies, but also in strategically choosing government priorities that their project would help succeed, or could be seen to help succeed. Right? So if a new minister or a new politician comes in, they say, okay, well, this is clearly useful for all of us, so every politician from all party is trying to have the project on board, right? That it ensures it will continue to be viable. The other main way of achieving sustainable impact is to really look to the long term, right? To plan for that sustainable impact. It sounds simple, it's not easy to do, especially in terms of technology life cycles, right? Not ensuring that your technology has to be refreshed after 5 years, having a continuous improvement program, but also building on existing mechanisms and moving beyond individual reliances as much as possible to make sure this long-term vision can be implemented.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and really, great takeaways. So thank you very much for your hard work, chairing the sessions, but also coming up with the takeaways in such a clear way in a very short time. So thank you very much for that.
All the participants.
And the participants and the rapporteurs, of course. So now, maybe a couple of minutes to ask whether people have any comments or questions before we turn to Jemima and Robert. Okay. Great. Well, you'll have an opportunity to comment on the report at a later stage. But let's move to you, Jemima. And as I was thinking about this, I kind of remind of the earlier conversations we had when we were thinking about this conference together with Mike and others. And really, the main objective of this conference was, to introduce people to each other, etc. at the end of the program. But importantly, to get the lessons that can help us think better about how we approach, these similar projects in the future, whether it's the FCDO, it's Chatham House, KPMG, the beneficiaries, etc. So now you've participated in this workshop and in the workshops and the conference more generally. did you get what you wanted out of that?
Sure. So firstly, before I answer the question, I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone for participating, whether you were in group 1, group 2, sitting on a panel or giving a talk, or sharing your views in a workshop. Really, thank you. And as Jamie said, everything that we've just talked through comes from you. Really, Joyce, as you said, our objectives were quite simple for this conference. We wanted to improve our understanding of the impacts of the projects that we've delivered with you over the last couple of years. We wanted to learn about what didn't work, as Rob and Jamie have just summarised, and thank you again for your honesty and openness in those discussions. And finally, we wanted to get the conversation going about where we can focus our work in the future, because these 5 countries will continue to be a priority for the UK's external engagement on cyber issues. So the short answer is yes, and I'm really looking forward to continuing those conversations.
Brilliant. And so from the takeaways that we've heard, what resonated with you the most? And did you have any additional observations that maybe weren't captured in this summary?
Sure. So a few general points, picking up on a couple of the comments that have really lodged in my mind over the course of today. So Jackie said something on the first panel around cybersecurity requiring people, process, technology, but also the buy-in from the top level governance, whether that's in an organization or a country. And it feels to me that we're starting to win that battle to get that buy-in. We're starting to see funding allocated, again, whether that's within a government, within an organization, or from another institution entirely, from a foundation. So we're starting to get that buy-in. We've heard a lot today about the strategies and the legislation that are in place across all 5 countries represented here. So now, and the ongoing challenge is operationalizing and allocating the funding that's becoming available in the most effective way. And it's also about reviewing those strategies and legislation and staying ahead of the curve. Someone else mentioned that earlier today. Another point, one which we all know, right, is that cybersecurity is a cross-cutting issue. Again, I don't think we need to keep making the argument that it is. I think most people accept that. But I think what we don't always do really well, speaking as UK cyber capacity building, what we don't always do really well is make sure that we're drawing on all of the tools available to address that as a cross-cutting challenge. So thinking, as well as the bilateral projects we can do with countries, what can we do through multilateral organizations, regional bodies, development finance institutions, trade finance, and bringing all of that together. And I'll finish on this point. Obviously, working in that holistic way presents a challenge of coordination. And it's really important that we all continue to make good use of the channels and the networks that exist to do that coordination. So one next step, I think, for me, is looking ahead to the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise. There's a big conference coming up next year, and I think that would be a great forum to take these lessons to an even wider audience.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the positive messaging, but also the concrete actions and sharing the challenges that you might encounter as you think about next steps and how do you kind of benefit and leverage all this knowledge that that these projects have generated and this experience too. Robert, so you're involved in the kind of that more generally, and we've been talking about this conference with you. And then one of the things that we wanted to get your perspective on is, having listened to these takeaways from the 16 different projects, what in your mind is the sort of significance of these lessons, these challenges, these kind of keys to success to the future of capacity building projects? What do they mean? How would they change maybe the way we think about capacity building from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question. Thank you. I work mostly on the first pillar of the DAP program, which is focused on digital inclusion. So a lot of this is less familiar to me, but it's really interesting to see the amount of work that's been done and what's been delivered, and it's really excellent and impressive. And what I'm also interested in is how similar some of the challenges are to the work that we're doing on digital inclusion. And there's real similarity there, and lots of the things run through. So I think that's really useful and for us to think about when we're developing projects across this entire space. I'm also just wanted to kind of thank everyone for the candor that people talked about their projects with. It's really, really helpful for people to be honest about what's not working as well as what is working. That's where we're really going to learn the most. You know, I think this is a really excellent opportunity for us to be able to kind of pause, reflect, and think about the future work we're doing here. And I think really fortunately, as a point that you already made, is that the successes seem to be much larger than the challenges, and where there are challenges, we do have an idea of what the solution might be. So I think that's really useful for us to bear in mind, and something that we can take forward to future delivery and to advocate for as well. So I just had a few reflections on it. A lot of reflections have been taken, so I've been scribbling away, crossing things out. But a few things I thought it was still worth mentioning. So one point is that obviously we're still in the foothills of this challenge, and I think this point's been made quite a few times. But the trends are really, really interesting. So just since the inception of DAP, connectivity in the countries that we're working on, has increased really significantly. And obviously, as Alessandra mentioned this morning, some of that's been driven by the pandemic. So we're seeing countries where 10, 20, 30% more people are online. In some countries, the number of people online have doubled. I think in Kenya, just over such a short period of time. It's just really fascinating to see, and just shows how important a time that we're in now. It's becoming more foundational to lots of important services, health, agriculture, education, and also really, really key to areas like e-commerce, and people are going to need trust and resilience, and I think that's the strapline of Pillar 2, and they're going to need it for companies to continue to work in this way, and this pivot is already happening. So this trust and resilience, it just needs to happen. There's no alternative option. And so the second point I wanted to talk about was cultural change. Again, that point has been raised. I mean, but it was repeated so often, and it seems to be so important. I think it's just I couldn't really not mention it. And what I thought is really interesting is what was repeated a few times, is that people's understanding of cybersecurity is pretty nebulous, just in general. It comes across as really scary, really complex, and something that you think that Simon Pegg in Mission Impossible addresses, but not normal people, right? And really getting that better sensitization about what it actually is to people is really, really crucial, and it runs through all of the different levels that we're working at. So whether we're thinking about getting more cybersecurity people into work, and we want people to be able to do some of the roles that don't require being a techie, but require kind of policy expertise or just general understanding of what the issues are, advocacy, communications, that's something we need to get more people in, so we need to be able to communicate that's something that's possible for people to do. When we're thinking about the analog services, such as police, or Mike was just talking about health in the previous session, we need people to be kind of, and he talked about the kind of foundational risks. We need people to understand those risks and understand that actually a lot of the threat comes from their level, and so having good cyber hygiene is really critical. And this also runs into broader things, just about how every person on a day-to-day basis is using it, so they understand what they should be doing to just be safe online. And a lot of the time, that's just what we're talking about. And the very final bit that I wanted to talk about, again, it's been mentioned, but maybe there's been a little bit less weight on it, is around the evidence and metrics. And what I think has been really, really nice is that people have said that this is something that they're challenging with. And we've got that, I think, from pretty much every single country, that it's just a bit difficult. You know, there's good practice, but actually, are we doing things as efficiently or effectively as we think we could? And I think it's really helpful to know that everyone else is in the same boat as you, and that actually it's important to be open about this, because what works and getting that information, getting that data, sometimes it exists in government, sometimes at project level or other levels it can be a little bit more challenging. So really kind of focusing on that, because if, as I said right at the top, this is exploding, we're in the foothills. That's mixing metaphors terribly. The point is that we need to be building evidence now whilst there's still kind of that opportunity. So yeah, that's it.
Brilliant, thank you. And maybe finally, Robert, before I ask the panelists in case they have anything else they'd like to add, Alessandro, you mentioned the plenary, the opening session, about how DAP is innovative, right? Kind of like maybe the first time thinking about integrating development and cyber, etc. Now that we've lived that experience, will this innovation continue? Like, was this approach that we will see it more in the kind of government projects, or tell us a little bit more?
Yeah,
if you can.
no doubt. I can't see them being separate. I think during the inception of, so I'm relatively new to the project, so I was looking through all of the documents not so long ago, the business cases when they were set, and these things are put together, but it's clear for me, talking to people and looking at some of the new projects that are coming through, that actually the relationship between the two, between digital inclusion, people having digital skills or at policy regulation level, and these issues around cybersecurity are becoming more and more obviously entangled. So I think we will see more close connection, and yeah, how we do that is a really important question for us to tackle.
Great, and we've heard a lot of great arguments today why this is important, actually, to think about them together rather than kind of like, in silos. Right, any final comments from the panelists, Robert?
No, just a big thank you to everyone.
Okay, great. No, okay. If I wanted, we have takeaways, but if I want like takeaways of the takeaways, right? And if we wanted to give like a big title of this, for this conference, I would say, narrative, education, and awareness, right? We've talked about them throughout the day, and I think they've emerged in everyone's comments about how important they are. And I think something you said, Robert, that also has been said, I think Jackie and others, we're all in the same boat, and it's important to understand that while the challenges might be different, everyone's trying to work towards the same goals, and I think that's a good reminder to kind of keep in our mind. So thank you very much for your time, and please take back your seats.
Thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I'm I'm actually the Chief Operating Officer for the National Cybersecurity Centre now. But what that means is I've been involved in cybersecurity at the national level in the UK government for about 10 years. So it's actually great to be at a conference where we're talking about this at the national level. So a lot of cyber conferences are about the network or about the individual or even about the organisation, even a big organisation like the NHS. But cybersecurity at the national level is a pretty unique challenge. So you're responsible for defending citizens and individuals, as I've heard, some of whom aren't even online yet, all the way up through critical national infrastructure to government itself. And that's a huge task. And it's really great, actually, that you're all here and you're sharing those experiences, because Mike said it was decades of work. I see it as our generational challenge. We want to get the benefits of this digital online technology. What we need to do is make sure we secure that against malicious activity, so we don't undermine the benefits, but we can all benefit safely from it. And I think that's what the UK has been trying to do, and what I've been involved in the last 10 years, mainly from an operational perspective, so tracking threats, dealing with incidents, trying to raise cyber resilience on a day-to-day, week-by-week basis. And I thought, 15 minutes, I think I'm standing between you and a pub, so I'll try and make this both short and valuable, but thought I'd share some lessons learned from those last 10 years. I was heading up a large cyber defence operations team in government before we established the National Cybersecurity Centre in 2016, and I was involved in both the work to define that, but also then to stand it up. And there was a really important sort of guiding principle behind establishing the NCSC, and that was that we needed a whole-of-government approach to cybersecurity. I think what we'd experienced prior to that is different bits of the government doing their best, to try and tackle incidents or raise resilience or write guidance. But because we hadn't joined it together, it certainly wasn't more than the sum of the parts. In fact, it was often working at cross purposes. I remember an incident where the Prime Minister, which I saw the briefing going up to the Prime Minister in the telecom sector, was being told about how this was possibly a nation-state attack on our critical national infrastructure, at the same time as a police force was outside the house of a 16-year-old hacker who'd just been playing around in his bedroom. That ability to understand what's going on in cyberspace is actually crucial to being able to tackle these threats. And the only way you can understand it is by bringing all those diverse sources of information together. So the NCSC was created to be the national technical authority for cybersecurity. And what we mean by that is we have the best threat expertise that the UK government can bring together. We combine that with the technical expertise, the best technical expertise that we can get in government. And that is one place where that threat expertise and knowledge comes together. It's really important in the middle of an incident. That's when sort of everybody's rushing around with their hair on fire. And I was running the incident from the NCSC in 2017, 12th of May, Friday, WannaCry that Mike referred to, and it really was hectic. That was our biggest test, I think, at the time. But it proved the model that having one place where the knowledge came in, where we could understand what was going on, we could give advice to our ministers and the Prime Minister, and be able to then get out advice to everybody to try and mitigate and reduce the harm was really, really important. So whole of government response. That doesn't mean we're not working in partnership, and everybody talks about public-private partnerships, and industry is massively important on this. But again, how do industry know who to talk to? When industry share data with us, how do we make sure that data gets shared across different parts of government? And so there's been a few really key principles that we try to apply when we're tackling cybersecurity, both tactically for incidents, but also more strategically. And that's don't divide the problem up, right? So we used to divide cyber into law enforcement would do cyber crime, military or the national security agencies would do nation state, local forces would do their own thing. We tried to divide it up to make it more manageable. We divided up who was responsible for protecting government and who was responsible for protecting industry, and nobody was trying to protect the individual citizen, frankly. So one of the biggest lessons was don't divide it up. You have to treat it holistically, as I think was referred to earlier. And that has been really, really powerful. Now, that doesn't mean your solutions are the same for everybody, and completely agree with the comments about communications and making sure your communications are tailored appropriately to the audience. But it has to be based on a single view and a holistic approach to what you're trying to tackle and the best expertise. And you can't deal with cyber in isolation. Again, I think it's probably been mentioned. Obviously, a cyber incident, the important factor is the consequences it has in real world. So the WannaCry incident, okay, we all ran around and got really excited about the worm and how it was working and all the rest of it, but it was the potential impact on patients that was the important thing. So we've got to connect that cyber ecosystem with the consequence management system of the real world, whether that's the health sector, the transport sector, whatever it is. So this bringing it together, this whole of government approach is really important in the middle of an incident, but it's also really important to tackle it more strategically. So if you want to get everybody to raise their cyber resilience, they've got to be hearing very simple, clear, but consistent messages. They can't have different views, different perspectives. They don't know where to turn to. Any excuse not to do the right thing, if they're hearing a different message from different bits of government, then you won't get through to people. So it has to be very, very clear from one place. But also government working together can intervene directly in a way that you can't if you diffuse that effort. So really struck actually, and one of the strategic challenges I think, once we get over this incident, once we get over sort of managing some of the immediate crises, is about how do we better secure future technology. So there's an opportunity here if you're rolling out connectivity to new communities who haven't previously been online, to let's build security in from the start, right? The internet, quite rightly, was built to collaborate and people didn't think about security. But we have an opportunity now to start building in security to the technology we're going to use in 5-10 years' time. So let's try and do that. To do that, we also need to make sure that we take that understanding of technology and that understanding of cybersecurity and use it to influence policies across government, actually. So NCSC is not, by any means, the bit of government that does cybersecurity. We're the bit of government that helps everybody else do cybersecurity as effectively as possible. So if that first stage in NCSC's evolution and the UK cyber strategy was about whole of government effort, I think that the next stage, and it was launched with a new national cyber strategy December last year, is about whole of society. And again, that's a recognition that government can't do this by itself. There's public-private partnerships have been in every single cyber strategy I've ever read for the last 10 years, in every country that I've ever seen it. And it's absolutely right, but the trick is not to say that's important. The trick is how do you make that work? And it's difficult, right? Everybody has tried to do this. I think from our perspective, the lesson I have learned is that values are key. The way you try and do this is really, really important. So those effective public-private partnerships, that information sharing, it's got to be based on trust. You've got to build that trust. That can take time. That, depending on your own circumstances, that might mean different interventions, different ways of configuring. You need to build trust. I think transparency is really important. So the NCSC has tried really hard to be transparent with all of the interventions that it makes. We run these active cyber defence services where we intervene directly to try and block malicious activity online. But we publish a report every year that gives a full range of details about what it is we're doing. We're not trying to do this in secret. We're trying to do this for the public good and to build trust. It's really important to be evidence-based. So again, we try and make sure that we're transparent with the evidence we use in order to develop the policies, the guidance, and the interventions that we make. And it's really, really important it's based on expertise. And that technical, skilled expertise is not the solution for the whole problem, but it's definitely got to be at the heart of the solution. So I think those are probably our big lessons, actually. So importantly, the NCSC is not a regulator. We don't try and punish people when they have a cyber incident. We try and help them. We're not involved in domestic surveillance. We're not a law enforcement trying to prosecute crimes and criminals. We're not political. We're here to try and raise cyber resilience, to try and reduce the harm from cyber incidents, and to help everybody benefit from that online digital technology. We believe as part of the UK government in responsible cyber power, in the rule of international law applying to cyberspace, and we're supportive of free, open, peaceful and secure cyberspace. I think my favourite example of how this comes together in terms of whole of society working together, trust, sharing of information is our suspicious email reporting service. So this is something we launched about almost 2 years ago now. And this is where we invite the public to send in suspicious emails that they receive in their inboxes. And of course, you will get this, right? So you see them, and some of them are obvious, some of them are less so. You can send them to us. We'll put them, and we do use machine learning. We use big data technologies in order to process that information, but we also have a service that will reach out and take down those malicious websites that lie behind those scams. In the first 2 years, I think we've got over about 11 million emails from the members of the general public in the UK. I think we're over 100,000 unique malicious scams that we've taken down as a result of that. So despite all of our great technology, despite all of industry and their ability to generate threat intelligence, the UK public has identified over 100,000 scams that we wouldn't have known about. And what they've done by identifying it and sending it to us is protected the rest of the UK, and in fact the rest of the world, because this is not geographically specific, from those scams. And that ability to get that whole of society behind us, to get everybody's input into making it a much more secure internet, I think is the way out of this. So on your measures of success, I was at an incident management conference last week with a bunch of practitioners in government and industry. And I said my aim was to put them out of business. If we could have no more cyber incidents, that would be great, right? Unfortunately, we are a long way from that. We're decades of work, I think we might call it. We haven't solved it, but that's why this conference is really important. So capacity building, helping each other to raise our ability to defeat cyber threats is really, really important. It is our generational challenge, and it's great to see everybody here today working together on it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. That was really great, and your examples of what actually whole society mean in practice are very welcomed indeed, and the thinking behind the NCSC and how you've been working and the transition from whole of government to whole of society and the sort of challenges and how you've been facing them. So thank you very, very much for this talk. I'm sure everyone here appreciates it. So we've unfortunately come to the end of the conference, and I'm not doing a big speech, I'm sorry, and I'm sure you'll be happy that I'm not. But just to say that cyber capacity building is quite an important priority for our team at Chatham House, and it's something that we think about all the time, and we have a lot of projects really looking at capacity building and what are the sort of the the best ways and the best approaches and the lessons that we can take as we think about this issue going forward. So I think from my own perspective, there's a lot of lessons that I took away. We definitely will be thinking about them and incorporate them into our sort of approach when it comes to this issue. In terms of next steps, as I mentioned before, there will be a report from this conference which will be shared with all of you, which will include all the takeaways, and you'll have a chance to kind of see them, comment on them before we finalize it. So you'll expect to hear from us about this very soon. We've been talking that this is such a great community of practitioners and decision makers from the 6 countries, I should say, if not more. So it might be, a good idea that, that we create a way for you to remain in touch. So we'll be asking you in a follow-up email whether you'd like to share your contact details, and if you do, then we'll share that with everyone so you can hopefully remain in touch even when we're not involved directly in organizing workshops, etc. Now, important next step, immediate next step, is that people will be heading to a pub next door called the Starman. So if you'd like to join, there will be some people at the kind of reception, at the entrance, and we can all walk there together. And I think finally, like some thank yous here that are definitely due. So first of all, I'd like to thank the FCDO, Jemima and team, and Alessandra and everyone else, Robert, Will, Paul, everyone from the UK government who have been incredibly supportive of this conference and the project more generally. Also, a big thank you to KPMG, Mike, Rich, John, and the entire team for an incredible, work in the last 3 years and delivering on these amazing 16 projects, and for all the support they've given us in bringing you all here. And finally, a very big thank you to my colleagues at Chatham House. And if you don't mind, I'm going to call them out by name because they've been doing an incredible job. So Bella, first, if you can stand up, please. Hallie, where's Hallie? I can't see Hallie. She's probably somewhere running, like with her camera. So Hallie is someone else. Oh, Hallie, here she is. Thank you. And they've been doing incredible work, but of course everyone else, James, Amrit, Julia, the entire team. So thank you very much, and great to see everyone, and hopefully we'll see you again here. Thank you.